I mean, actually, the paper which I'm presenting today, to a certain extent, is questions the same issue which was questioned yesterday by Mark von Linden. What is the problem with unions and why they are so weak nowadays, and why they are seems to being lost in searching their way? What is complicating? This is about really about one country, Hungary, which has a bit more complicated history because of the state socialism and its impact on workers and on unions. So the title is Dichtung und Warheit, is coming from Goethe autobiography. And we have a Dichtung, a vision about unions. We have a reality of unions, and we have the workers who have sometimes very calculative relationship with the union. And really what I am asking is how is relating to each other the vision, the Dichtung, the reality, Wahrheit, and workers' position. So in the early transition period, 88, 89, there were great hopes that once socialism disappears, we would have a kind of union renewal. There were three different visions. One is the former state socialist unions, where the middle cadres, who were deemed themselves to be professional and democratic, they said, oh, finally, we get rid of this old communist cadres, and we could do real interest representation. We could be real professionals once we are out of the straitjacket of this party state, and we would have a kind of social market economy close to a neo-corporatist style democratic socialism controlled market economy. We had also another vision, this dissident pro-democratic union activists. They thought, oh, these former communist unions, they are old bureaucratic machinery. There will be a grassroots renewal of union, and we build up a German ordoliberal style social market economy with strong welfare state and no corporatist policy making to balance marketization. And there was a third strand, which is workers' council movement, workers' control, workplaces, to a bit certain extent following the 56 tradition. 3 decades later, unions became completely marginalized in the nation as a nation political actors. They have hardly any voice anymore. Unions became very weak. There are 400,000 union members, more or less. 90% of the union members have been disappeared. There's a fractured union movement. There's financial weakness, lack of professional union full-time officials. The National Confederation has 5, 6 full-time union officials. A sectorial union has 2, 3 full-time union officials. Almost no sectorial collective bargaining. Very few workplaces where we have at least 50% of workers union members, and very few where we have collective agreements. And employees, workers, towards unions, get lost, disinterest, calculative relationship. They mostly have local concerned issues and very few committed union activists. So we have a weak integration of unions into workers' life, into the workplaces, and into the national political system. And the aim of the paper, why this has happened, despite the fact that to a certain extent, Hungary is offering an ideal space for reunionization. Hungary is going through a very rapid reindustrialization. 33% of workers of the workforce belong to blue-collar workers. We are more industrialized than Germany. We are more industrialized than any European country, maybe Poland not, but relatively low wage level, a lot of dissatisfaction, and existence of perception of exploitation due to low wages, bad working conditions, flexible and long working time, managerial arbitrariness. So this is the condition for union. And additionally, we have another problem, because most of the companies are Germans, Americans, Japanese. There's a kind of nationalist sentiment. Oh, this bad work, world, multinationals exploiting us. There's an increasing shortage of workers, which is a good condition for union organization. And we have some existing union structures which have some capacity to guide and lend help to local unionization in the selection efforts. Despite of these ideal conditions, very weak result. So in order to understand why Hungarian unions are not successful, I try to list what are the factors of union power. One is coming from the turn of the century. Sidney and Beatrice Webb, you may know, they were very famous Fabian socialists. They have a wonderful book, Workers' Democracy. And anybody have it, I don't know, read it or not, you should read it. This is about how unions worked in the turn of the centuries. They say unions are successful and strong if they're able to be a cartel of employees to limit competition of the market among workers, in the same time management arbitrariness in order to ensure some stability and perceived fair condition to union members, workers. This was a bit reconfigured, the same message, by Alan Flanders. Alan Flanders, in the 60s, one of the leading British industrial relations scholars. He became later, I think, even the member of House of Lords. He said, unions has double faces. First, they have to be a business organization providing services to members. But that is not enough. They have to be a sword of justice. Because this gives them stability, and this gives them cadres, activists who are committed and who are ready to sacrifice sometimes their lives, sometimes their career for a larger societal purpose. And there's another strand of literature, Samuel Valenzuela, who did a wonderful article about the integration of unions in Latin America, but also Robert Cohen asked the same question in 1986, what is happening with the American unions, that also important for unions, the willingness to offer some kind of integration into economic, political management of the country and workplaces on behalf of political forces, political parties management, to a certain extent accommodate unions and to give privileges to unions in order to be able to build up representation. So what I'm doing now is to look these factors, what is happening in Hungary. Also, we have a Hungarian peculiarity, being post-socialist country. And unions view past-dependent institutions, and perception of unions is to a large extent shaped by their past. Not only by current and future-oriented expectations and concerns, what is happening in the workplaces, what is their offer, but also what is their past. And the Hungarian or the post-socialist peculiarity, impact of socialist past on the perception of legitimacy of unions mixed with current concerns. So what I'm doing now is just going through these 4 issues. What has happened in Hungary? Impact of socialist past, cartel, business organization, sword of justice. I'm speaking about Hungary, but also a bit of Europe is inside, because Hungary is a kind of idiosyncratic mixture of current Europe and the post-socialist past. Impact of socialist past. This is the truth. In the view of many, in the eyes of many workers, unions are things of the communist past, surviving institutions of the cadres of the past. Consequence, widespread distrust towards unions. You can sense this, you go to workplaces. It's very important. On behalf of the political right, union is a former communist organization which is suspectably allied to the old left, which is the reformed socialist parties. So consequent distrust towards unions and no political willingness to offer accommodation to the political system and ensure statutory embeddedness at sectoral and workplace level. On behalf of union officials, it's also very important because most of the unions are the surviving organization of the past. And their organizational culture is coming from their being part of the management somewhere in the past. So their basic attitude is we try to negotiate with management here in this closed room and avoid mass movement, mobilization, but try to get an agreement and try to reach on the table. So the second, innovative form a charter to limit competition and management. I mean, heyday of this type of unionism was the 19th century craft unions. And the origin of this kind of unions is adaptation of the guild practices to a free labor market in order to restore the stability and the fair conditions which was perceived at that time. Now, modern legal system does not allow space for unions to cartelize labor markets and limit the influx of outsiders. Sometimes you can find these craft practices in the United States or England, mostly in the United States. Sometimes if you go to Germany or to go to Spain, you still have remnants of these institutions that skilled workers is getting into the workplaces through unions, which is a kind of heritage. But in a modern system like Hungary, which was completely organized the industry, as Tibor is explained in the earlier lecture, there is no space for unions. The Post-Socialist Labor Code, which is regulating the union rights, sought to end the influence of perceived socialist practice of unions of being voice of the workers. Because said, who knows who were these unions? Maybe they were part of the management, I mean the socialist management. So what the new post-socialist labor code is based on to re-establish the autonomy of worker to contract, a labor contract. And unions are only offered right to advise the workers, but they couldn't act in the name of the worker. So unions became a kind of third party, but not in between the management and the worker, in the name of the community, but on behalf of the Indian workers. If the Indian workers ask his advice, and union can send a legal representative, but unable to extend one case into a collective issue, or very difficult. And also we have to speak about the modern management techniques. Compared to the 19th century, we have a highly refined, specialized, individualized, and flexible system under the control of the management, and not anymore skilled workers representing the core of the workplaces was in the past. So this kind of power is very rare. Sometimes in Hungary we have a few craft, like the engine drivers in the railway system, air controllers, very few. Being a business organization providing services. This is also the origin of the craft unionism. When they were in one hand craft unions, on the other hand they were mutual association providing social welfare services when there wasn't any welfare state around. I mean, and to a certain, this is the socialist heritage of the unions, because unions, as part of the management in the socialist countries, they were who redistributed company welfare measures. Kindergartens, everything is belonged to unions, and workers were union members in order to get 2 weeks of holiday on the Balaton or whatsoever. So the first thing in 1989 was stripping unions from being part of the management, and they were kicked out of the welfare system. They became dependent on membership fee, and they redistribute part of the membership fee as a kind of welfare handout, but this is minuscule. Also, it's very important, we have a full-fledged welfare state and a high tax regime. So the combination of two, there is no space for union to develop a mutual system based on the old communities line. Unions are left outside this system. And also very important in the third, which was explained before, they couldn't be any more legal agency to defending the working rights, because the labor code had a very limited for unions. So it's very difficult for them to develop a business organization in order to, based on their membership, on providing efficient services to membership. Third, being sword of the justice. I mean, the origin also of this story is going back to the 19th century. I mean, like in every country in the 19th century, there was an oligarchic, conservative democracy with limited suffrage. And the main cause of the left is to extend suffrage and to give rights to the downtrodden to have a say in the country. Also, it was combined with fight for state redistribution, extension of welfare state, also fight for workplace regulation, extension of collective agreements, and also this was extended, or this was combined, especially in the 19th century, fight for democratic or not democratic socialism, in case of social democracy, or Marxist socialism. So what is happening in the 19th century, which is explaining what Mark van Linden asked, why is the 1818s was the big blossoming of unions? The infusion of sword of justice, social political demands into a business union served to gain emotional support, ardent political driven cadres, and political linkages to typically social democratic political parties, which was the way to inclusion unions in the age of the great moderation of the Second World War. And it was a political context when the left was the left. They were left representing the downtrodden working people, and the right was representing aristocratic elites, very quickly. So what is happening in nowadays? First, we have a full-fledged democracy, not perfect, but more or less. We have a very extensive welfare state, not perfect, but more or less. We have a very high tax level and the debt level. So it's very difficult to extend this whole thing. No? It's very difficult because it's too much coming, the IMF, Chinese, whatsoever, we know this. So the consequence is difficult to find a long-term realistic agenda beyond the workplace concerns, which could give ideological support for union organization, as in the 19th century. We have a second problem. What was right and what was left is not anymore working. Both left, and now we have left-right and right-left. They became hybridized. They became mixed. I mean, both right and both left is claiming to represent the people. What is the name of the coalition, European coalition of right-wing parties? European People's Party. Yeah? They are representing the people as much as the left. They are as populist in a term of technical sense. They are middle of rightists. And they both have leftist claims, being the voice of, and rightist, especially when they are government. Because when you are in opposition, it's easy to say, but you are when you are government, you do all kind of things in order to maintain the mixed economy and competitiveness. And if you are lucky and you are in a boom period, you can extend the welfare state. Oh, when you are in a crisis period, then you have to do the so-called neoliberal reform, Schröder, and so on, we know these stories. So, consequence, no clear-cut position for unions to search a political ally and to a wider political agenda, which is distinguish the unions from the political parties, which are also competing for the sympathy of the majority of working people. And this is especially in the East, so in the former post-socialist countries, but also in the West, the discreditation of Marxist socialist leftist agenda because of the failure of state socialism. So, consequences, unions pose themselves as politically neutral welfare agencies and professional interest representation agencies, offering very timid or even no political agenda for activists and potential activists. And consequence too, especially in the former post-socialist countries, a suspicion of unions on behalf of political right and those whose families suffered under socialism due to political persecution, economic degradation of some form, which were many. So, the summary. To a certain extent, unions in the modern 21st century context lost their ideological, political integrative position due to democratization, reconfiguration of the political left and right into a blurred or hybrid position. Unions are unable to rebuild the cartel-based market-controlling union model due to the legal changes and loss of tradition. We don't have any more guilds to build on. And also, they are very difficult to sustain the welfare provision model without willingness of political parties management to share management prerogative and accommodate unions. So what we have a space for unions, in one hand, in those countries where unions maintained and achieved a very well integrated position in the 50s, 60s, 70s, to defense and to save the earlier interlocutor integrated political position as much as possible. They have this kind of defense the welfare state, which is somehow replaced the ideological commitment and became the main message of unions. And the third, they could rest on local conflicts and crisis management. But in these cases, workers always has a calculative position. When I'm better, I choose the collective action, or I try to negotiate with the manager on an informal basis, or just take my hat and go to the next workplace. This makes unions very fragile institutions, lack of resources, and explaining, I think, much of the decline across the Western world, and especially in Eastern and Central Europe. And also, this makes it very difficult to rebuild unions to be again a strong societal force, as our Dichtung vision, which we inherited from the past, would dictate. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, András. Normally the custom is that we collect questions after the end, but here the speaker unfortunately has to leave earlier because of his flight, so we will take questions now. Comments? Thoughts?
Thank you. That was very illuminating.
Thanks.
I was just wondering, in your presentation, you talked about past perceptions of trade unions and how modern unions fail vis-a-vis these perceptions. I was wondering whether there are new elements in our labor relations that could have contributed to this demise, as it were.
Yes, I think one is very important. The one is the kind of reconfiguration of middle class concerns. Green movement, LGBT issues, environment. Very important. Yeah. This is also very important because according to my interview experiences, workers in general, they are, we call it in Hungary, it's not a good word, petit bourgeois, traditional, conservative, especially because there is a kind of reconfiguration industry out of big urban centers to countryside. You know, you have this kind of aluminium-based small plants everywhere. In every village you have a small plant. And Budapest, for example, is not anymore a major manufacturing city. In the 19th century, urban workers were the main focus of unions. Now, most of the workers are countryside, first generation, former peasants, traditional, religious, conservative, in their everyday attitude. And the leftist middle class, main concern, LGBT, racism, white, working class, we know these words, no? And they're just saying, I am the enemy. Who they are. So the big gulf. In the 19th century, you have the urban progressive middle class, which was radical, anti-feudal, and pro-socialist. and they fit together very well with the urban working class, who were anti-feudal, pro-socialist. In the 21st century, we have an urban, educated, progressive middle class whose main issues are lifestyle issues and against industrialization because that is contaminating the world. And we have blue-collar unions which are saying, what you do with my workplace? We are, for us, family. I mean, if you ever spoke with workers, they sometimes give toothbrush to their children. Well, they believe in hierarchy to a certain extent in family. Man is man. I don't. This is not my opinion, of course, you know. So they have there is an emerging gulf, and this is also very important. So many ways, I think one of the main reasons why the left is left without workers, and the right, especially the populist right, is full of worker support because of this kind of combination of identity and cultural issues. In the meantime, and this is a major issue, and in this case, unions are also competing with the NGOs. So, yeah, sorry.
Some more questions.
Sorry.
No,
Sorry.
Thank you. That was a really interesting paper. The one thing that slightly surprised me is that it's now a generation since the end of state socialism, and yet, from how you presented it, unions are still seen through the prism of the role that they played 30 years ago, and even the union activists still seem to be shaped by that experience. Is that changing at all? Is there any prospect for that to change?
To say the truth, family socialization is very important.
Sorry?
Family socialization is very important, and we still have just one generation.
Okay.
One. Yeah. Second, there is now a change. So what has happened, that during the transition period, those cadres came to lead the unions who were in their early 40s. So this generation is moving out now because they are 65, 70. They try to cling on their job, of course. So this generation is moving out now, and there is a kind of new generation emerging who is now in their 40s, who is beginning to taking over. But to change this perception, there's need a time, longer time. I think Rolf Dahrendorf had this famous sentence: to change your political system 6 weeks or 3 weeks, you change your economic system 3 months, and change your political culture 3 generations. I mean, something like this, or 2 generations, 2 years, 2 months, I don't know. But clearly, we are 1 generation away. And also because the political right is living on the memory of the socialists, so there is a kind of current. It is on the media. They are the same communists doing.
Just one comment. So there is, I would call it like we are doing a common research in the Audi actually, and there is a grassroots unionization, but the leaders tend to be more right-leaning than left-leaning, and that explains. What he said explains. So it's not that there is no unionization, but it is not necessarily good for the left.
I mean, partly because this is countryside cities, and the social system was the most cruel with the peasantry. So their parents was way suffered. So they came into the system with remembering that they destroyed us, and they're still here.
I would even argue that there's just one comment you said about the elementary school tool. So, the GDR's memory was permanently criminalized. The same is true in Hungary. So the mainstream, not only family socialization, but also school teaching, they have this criminalization of the old regime. And on the one hand, on the other hand, the parents have some kind of nostalgia for the old times when they had jokes, blah, blah, blah. And then this might, again, especially in Eastern Europe, pushes them far away from the left to the right. Sorry. Sorry.
Yes, I have a question. Thank you first for your presentation. Very interesting. My question can be very specific because of my studies. I'm a specialist of French trade unions and the international policy of trade unions. And I'm wondering what was the role of Western unions in the phase of transition, because I saw that early 89 there is some relationship between the idea of possible reformism of socialist unions in the 80s, following Solidarność, etc. After 89, a lot of link, exchange, relation, and those have a role can be always can they, is there an explanation of the weakness of unionism, of the defeat of unionism? Always see the activism of Western Union in Hungary, for instance?
To say the truth, no. I mean, to a certain extent, in the eve of the transition, the role model for Hungarian unionists were the Western unions. So they tried to copy what they learned, what they perceived, what is Western unionism. And this is what the ILO and the EU also pushed on these countries. So national tripartitism, a kind of neo-corporatism model. This was the age of Schmitter. You know this literature in the 70s, how the Western Europe went through the major crisis, through neo-corporatism. So there's the major idea was we shall build up in Central and Eastern Europe a neo-corporatist structure, which is giving voice to employers and unions and government, and they negotiate the burdens of the transition. And this was more or less fit into the dreams of union cadres who just wanted to sit back to the table and negotiate. No, I'm just making jokes, but you know. So, and this was very successful to a certain extent. It was really successful, and it was lasted 2 decades. And really, East and Central Europe is emulated a kind of neo-corporatist style national structure. The problem was twofold. The one is that this now, but this is my opinion, maybe unions have a different opinion on this. This neo-corporatist style of framework meant state aid to unions. So union leadership, okay, I have money, resources, I just have to negotiate with the government and don't care about what is happening at the grassroots level. So unions were like the flowers turning to the sun. Where is my money coming? There I am very active. Yeah, membership is going away. Most of the membership fee is redistributed as a kind of welfare handout. So how I could ensure my organization's survival? Government money, EU funding, being on the press, voicing national concerns. So they didn't put enough emphasis on union organization. Now there's a new turn, mostly due to the German unions, the IG Metall and the DGB. I don't know, you are maybe much more familiar with these issues than me. But around 2000, the German unions also realized that they are in trouble because they're also losing membership. So the German unions has introduced a new organizing model, copying the American EFL-CIO, and they have a huge, huge efforts to revitalize union membership, at least as far as I know. And what the German unions are trying to do now is trying to help East and Central European unions to focus on workplace, on mobilization, and to create a new organizational culture which is about interest representation, workers' mobilization, effective unions, and so on. And I think this is a very important shift, very useful shift. We will see. I don't know, I hope it gives answer.
Thank you very much. One last question. Okay,
You said that the workers now are the fact the peasant workers, while the workers in the 19th century were progressive. But actually, the 19th century workers were also very religious, traditional, and originated from peasants. So tell me what happened that they experienced emancipation and no contemporary workers failed in this process, because in theory we are in the times where the social emancipation is much more easier than everywhere before. We all have the same smartphones, we all are watching the same lifestyle, but far right is increasing. Why?
So my explanation of the thing is the following. In the 19th century, industrialization took place on a way that skilled workers, there was the same single market than was, or even more single market than now. So workers, craft workers, were moving in between and among countries. Most of the Hungarian organized working class, which became the working class, this Marxist trade unionist thing, they were mostly Germans, Slovaks, Czechs, who came in the 19th century into Hungary. They came to Budapest, they helped set up, which is now doing the engineers, when multinationals dumping expatriate engineers to set up a company. In the 19th century, they came experienced skilled workers, and they took with themselves their own culture into Hungary. The Hungarian workers' daily, the Népszava, originally was German language, and became in the turn of the century 1898 bilingual, and I think 1903 became only Hungarian language. So what has happened, a kind of much more complex were the workers, because there was a lot of immigration in between. A lot of practices were borrowed from the so-called West, which was maybe 20, 30 years advanced in industrialization. Also, Hungarian craft workers, the Hungarian social democratic movement was revitalized in the 1890s by young Hungarian craft workers who, after finishing their trainee years, there was a custom to go west. And they went to Germany. There they became union members. They became social democrats. After 3 or 4 years, they came home and they said, what is here? What is this feudalistic, old-style country? We need to set up real German-style unions. This was very important. The leadership of the metal workers unions were all this kind of young 20-somethings who came back from Germany, and they just redid what they experienced in Germany in Hungary. Also was very important the role of the International, the first and the second International, who sent emissaries, entrusted the Austrian Social Democrats to help to organize the Hungarian. So there was a much more internationalized, even more Europeanized the world than it is now. What is now is happening that now the industrialization is driven by expatriate engineers. So workers have a much weaker position compared to the past. It's very important. And the second is that nowadays there's very few workers coming to Hungary to work for Hungarian wages in Hungary. And this is also explaining the Hungarian weakness, which is a bit contrary to what is Mark van Linden said yesterday, that in the last decade, 600,000 employees left Hungary and went to work to Germany, Austria, England, and so on. To a certain extent, those who would make a revolt at home because the low wages, because of ability and so on, they just decided, get lost. I'm just easier. Instead of fighting at home, being in part of the smear campaign and saying, who knows, I just go over the border and I get 3 times higher salary and fine.
Thank you very much. I think we can continue with them longer, but there are still
Thanks very
some
much.
more speakers. So